Explain why trial by ordeal was used from the year 1000, I never know how to say that, to 1200. Or 1200, whatever you want to call it. That's the question. This is my help to help you answer it. So, for a 12-mark question such as this, you should be aware, first of all, of how to structure it. I'm not going to go over that here in massive detail, because I need you to be able to find that out for yourself or already know it. And if you look back in your books, you will either find that you've done it before, or you'll have targets which tell you what you should have been doing if you didn't do it. That should help you to do well on this particular 12-mark question. Now, one of the things I am going to have to give away is that normally for a 12-mark question, I'd try to think of 3 paragraphs. In an exam, when I'm under time conditions, I would have tried to do 2 paragraphs and come back at the end to try to add a third. For this question, I, as your teacher, would struggle to write about more than 2 key topics as to why trial by ordeal was used. And therefore, I'd probably just do 2 paragraphs and leave it at that. The first reason why trial by ordeal, and it's up to you to decide on the most important, but the first of the 2 reasons I'm going to talk about here is the lack of technology. In that time period, unless you actually saw the criminal doing the crime, it was impossible to know who done it, or extremely unlikely for you to find out conclusively who had done whatever crime it was. They didn't have access to fingerprints, DNA, they just did not have the technology. And even if somebody saw the criminal doing the crime, they still might not get convicted because it's their word against, his word against his, or her word against his, or his word against hers, that sort of thing. And so you might be in a situation in court where one person's saying, I saw him doing it, and the other person saying, well, I didn't do it. Or maybe even, I didn't do it, it was him. And so even in that situation, they thought, well, we need to find out who has done this crime. So the lack of technology, scientific understanding, linked to that. So I suppose this could be a third paragraph, or it could be a third paragraph. So I've revised my opinion now, started talking about it, is the lack of law enforcement. So they had to use this trial to decide who was guilty because there wasn't much law enforcement to investigate and find out who was guilty and who wasn't in the first place. It was done by the local communities, by volunteers largely. And so because of the difficulties of finding out who's guilty because of the lack of technology and the methods that we use now, and because of the lack of law enforcement actually spending the time to catch the criminals, they needed something that was cheap and quick. Punishments, trials, always had to be cheap and quick in the medieval period because there was nothing, the capability for anything else was just not there. So, I could put the lack of technology and law enforcement in one paragraph. I suppose I could do the lack of technology and in another paragraph, the lack of law enforcement. But the other one is the fact that everybody was extremely religious at the time. It wasn't a case that people thought, yeah, I believe in God, it might exist. It was like everybody knew there was a God. There was no, I might not believe. They all wholeheartedly believed. They were taught from a very young age. And if you didn't believe, you wouldn't tell anybody because you'd end up in serious trouble because it was against the law to do anything against the church. You would be looked at with suspicion. You just wouldn't do it because you'd be an outsider. Actually, I think the heresy laws came in a bit later than this period, but you just wouldn't do it because it would just be frowned upon. You'd be an outcast. And linked to this, not only is everybody religious, but the Pope, as the leader of the church, and the church itself, they were both extremely powerful. So powerful that they thought they could control and decide trials using trial by ordeal. All of those different things, they're reasons why trial by ordeal was used from 1000 to 1200. Don't forget to use connectives. So everybody at the time was extremely religious. This meant that. There was a lack of technology to help people to solve crimes. This meant that. You can't use connectives enough. You have to use keywords in the question. I'm giving away some exam technique here. But there's 5 minutes of help.